you for joining us today. I am Elizabeth Rudd, the Government Technical Representative for the study that we will be discussing today, the assessment of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian housing needs. Now, as you may know, this study was mandated by Congress 6 years ago, and so we are very happy to be able to say that the study is completed and that 4 of the reports from that study are now published. One report remains to be published, which is the study on Native Hawaiian housing needs, and that will be a separate report coming out toward the end of February. All of the published reports are now available on huduser.gov. So again, I'd like to welcome everyone who is here in person. We have a crowd. It's really nice to see. And I would like to welcome everyone participating via the webcast. And I'd like to let you know that we have, if you have questions that you would like to pose or inquiries about the study, we do have an email address that you can send your questions to. And that address is housing_needs_report@hud.gov. Should I say it again? Okay, I'm just going to say it again just in case. housing_needs_report@hud.gov. So to brief us today on the findings of this very important study, we have several members of the research team here. First of all, the Urban Institute led this study, and with us from the Urban Institute today to present findings are Nancy Pindis, Tom Kingsley, and Diane Levy. We also have Kristen Corey from Econometrica. She'll be talking about findings from Hawaii, from the Hawaii study. And I want to acknowledge the other members of the research team who are here today. That is Jasmine Symington from the Urban Institute. Is Carol? No, okay. Chuck Hansen from Econometrica, Walter Hillebrandt from Support Services International, and his colleague, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but raise your hand maybe or something. Okay. So, with that, I guess, Nancy, you can get started. Well, you know as much as I do.
One of these. Oh, okay.
Probably.
Well, thank you for coming, everyone, and for those on the call, thanks for listening in. I'm Nancy Pindis from the Urban Institute. This has been a long time coming. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to present findings to you today. I want to thank Elizabeth for seeing us through to the end of this project, and to many others at HUD who helped out along the way, from PDNR, from ONAP, and from Public and Indian Housing. The study teams, the members of the study team that are here were mentioned, except for Carol Hafford, who headed our survey component from NORC. In addition, there are many other team members, I think, who are listening in or calling, or who weren't able to make it today. And I want to tell you, this was a team effort. And then I especially want to thank the 38 participating tribes in the study, who worked with us for a very long time, and and we hired interviewers from many of those tribes to conduct interviews, and the residents of those tribal lands participated in interviews. So I want to, that's what made the study possible. That's why we have findings. So I do want to make a point about that. Just a little bit of context. This is the first major comprehensive study of its kind since the last study completed for HUD by the Urban Institute in 1996. So our goal obviously was to update the information and also to provide a broader socioeconomic context to understand the housing needs and conditions. The briefing today is going to review the main findings of the overall study of the assessment of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian housing needs. And there were 4 reports, the one on tribal lands, one addressing mortgage lending in tribal lands, one on American Indians and Alaska Natives in urban areas, and one on Native housing needs of Native Hawaiians. The bulk of the presentation is going to focus on the main report, but we will be discussing highlights from each of those reports. So moving on then to the main report, since there's a lot of information to cover here. First, I want to just go over briefly with the data sources that we used. We had census data and also HUD administrative data files, primarily ONAP's performance tracking database on the Indian Housing Block Grant. The other data, then in addition to that secondary data, there were several new primary data collection efforts as part of this study. There were 2 surveys that included a nationally representative sample of tribal areas. The household survey included the 38 tribes in that sample, and 1,340 interviews were completed with an average response rate of 67%. The other survey was a survey of the tribal housing administrators who are tribal or TDHE officials, and there were 120 tribal areas in that sample, and 110 interviews were completed. These were telephone interviews for a 95% response rate. In addition, we conducted site visits to 22 of those 38 tribal areas in the household survey. We talked with tribal leaders, with housing office program staff, and with community leaders. So it was a very complex data collection effort, multi-tiered. Throughout it all, we respected tribal sovereignty and research requirements, had to get approval from the tribes to do that data collection. And once again, I really have to thank NORC for implementing that data, the bulk of that data collection effort, hiring and training tribal interviewers, and making this a success. So on this report of housing needs on tribal lands, there are basically 3 parts: one on the demographic, social, and economic context, the second on housing needs and conditions, and the third looking at federal housing assistance and housing policies and programs. So we're going to turn first to just a little more background about how we developed the study, and then we will move on to talking about the context, the demographic and socioeconomic. The tribe, just to give you a big picture view here for the location of the tribal areas, we tried to capture the national picture, and we used as a starting point HUD's ONAP service areas. But 3 of those areas were considered too heterogeneous, so we then divided them further, and that was for Phoenix and for Oklahoma. So we ended up with those study areas for the tribal areas. And in terms of the coverage that we had for those tribal areas, there were 526 counties, most of which were selected from the native tribal, American Indian, Alaska Native tribal areas, but also from surrounding counties, those that were surrounding tribal areas. We use this as the same typology that was used in our 1996 report, so that when possible we could compare things back to what happened then. But there were adjustments that had to be made to apply those areas to the 2010 census data. So we used the 1,617 American Indian and Alaska Native areas defined by the Census Bureau in 2010. Now the next phase of the study, I'm going to turn this over to Tom Kingsley, who is going to talk about the main findings first of the socioeconomic conditions and then about housing conditions and needs. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I want to also extend my congratulations to everybody in getting this incredible thing accomplished and all done the way it has been. I'm going to focus on our findings about housing conditions, but first I need to say a few things about 3 aspects of the social and economic environment that you need to know about when you're considering the housing needs of any population. First, whether the population is growing or not. Second, what are the economic circumstances of that population? And thirdly, the internal uniformity or diversity of conditions in that population. I'm not sure I know what to do to advance this here. There we go. With respect to the first of these, this slide shows that the growth of populations most likely to be associated with recognized U.S. tribes has indeed been substantially growing of late in tribal areas and their surrounding counties. These are the places we care about for this report. The total American Indian and Alaska Native, or AIAN, population in tribal areas grew by 12% from 2000 to 2010, compared to only 10% for the U.S. population as a whole. The AIAN population in tribal areas reached 1.1 million in 2010. AIAN growth in the surrounding counties was an even faster 31%, reaching a total of another 1.3 million. And it's important to note that the group that's often considered most closely linked to recognized tribes, those who identify AIAN as their only race and don't claim to be Hispanic, those are the darkest blue segments on these bars at the bottom. They grew much faster in tribal areas and the surrounding counties than they did in the rest of the country, by 10% versus 6%. This suggests that the linkage to traditional tribal areas and cultures indeed remains strong. Most are staying close to home rather than moving to some distant cities. Now, this slide is just a reminder showing a picture that's all too typical for indicators of economic well-being nationally. It shows that problems for AIAN populations are generally worse than for non-Indians virtually everywhere, and worse for Indians in tribal areas than for Indians living in other parts of the country. This example is the poverty rate, which is as of the 2006 through 10 American Community Survey, ACS, was only 18% for all races in the U.S. on average, but 22% for Indians in metropolitan counties outside of Indian country, and 32% for AIN people in tribal areas. That means its tribal area rate was 1.8 times the U.S. average, substantially in excess. And this slide makes a point we got to remember throughout. Conditions across tribal areas are very diverse. The indicator here is the number of private sector employees as a percentage of the total population. It's a measure that correlates pretty well with other indicators of economic well-being. We have the data for 213 largest tribal areas nationally, and they account for about 90% of the total AIAN tribal area population. And there's great diversity. In the top quarter of these areas, the little blue triangles, private employees make up more than 17.9% of the population, and they're located many, many different parts of the country, but with the largest cluster in Oklahoma. The bottom quarter, the orange circles, in contrast, private employment counts for less than 7% of the population, and these are concentrated more in the poorest regions in India country, Arizona, the Plains, and Alaska. I think it's interesting on this slide that Alaska has a large country cluster of areas with among the worst scores. Again, those are the orange circles along the northeast coast, along the northeast coast, but also it has several that rate among the highest in terms of private economic activity along the southwest coast rather. Now we turn to what was the central motivation for this study, our findings on housing problems and needs. In this work, we follow standards used by HUD in its work on worst-case housing needs, and these start with physical problems in three categories: systems deficiencies, which include plumbing, kitchen, heating, and electrical, condition problems, including structural deficiencies, holes in the roof, so forth, and overcrowding, defined as having more than one person per room. And then they covered the most rapidly growing problem almost everywhere, which is cost burden, defined as having more, defined as paying more than 30% of their income for housing expenses. We've got two sources of information. The first is our recently completed household survey, which Nancy mentioned, a snapshot with data on tribal areas as of our around 2014 date, from 2013 to 2015. And it offers data on all these problems. Second, our Census Bureau surveys, which don't have data on three of these problems. They don't have data on heating, electrical, or condition deficiencies, but they've got all the rest, and they have the benefit of allowing us to make, with larger sample sizes, comparisons across different geographies. Our central findings from the survey is that AIAN housing problems in tribal areas are still much worse for the U.S. on average in almost all categories. Physical problems have declined enough to be really negligible for the U.S. population on average. Incidences typically 1% to 2%, but clearly not for Indians in tribal areas. For example, the U.S. average share of households with plumbing deficiencies was 1%. This is, by the way, from the 2013 American Housing Survey, but it was 6% for AIN populations in tribal areas. The share overcrowded was 2% for the U.S. on average, all races, but 16% for Indians in tribal areas. That's 8 times the overall U.S. average. So these are really enormous differences. The only ones where incidences were near the same were electrical deficiencies, about 1% for both, and cost burden, 36% versus 38%. Now, while this way of counting things is obviously helpful, it doesn't meet our needs for a single overall measure. You can't add these percentages up to get totals, number of households affected, because that would involve double counting. You've got a single household, for example, could have a cost burden problem plus a plumbing deficiency problem plus others, so you can't add them up and get households. So this slide deals with that problem, and it uses mutually exclusive categories. It shows that 10% of AIA and tribal area households had plumbing and or kitchen deficiencies. Another 13% that didn't have plumbing or kitchen deficiencies had some mix of heating, electrical, or condition problems, and another 11% that did not have any of those problems were overcrowded. Finally, another 23% cost burden was their only problem. Altogether then, 34% of AIN households in tribal areas had one or more physical problems, compared with only 7% for all U.S. households on average. Throwing in cost burden only, 57% had one or more identified housing problems of any kind, compared with 40% for U.S. households on average. Now, we were asked if we could use the survey as a basis for at least a rough estimate of the number of new affordable units that would be required to eliminate overcrowding and replace severely inadequate housing in tribal areas. And we've taken a stab at that on this chart. Overcrowding here is defined as by the one person per room standard we've been talking about, and we define severely inadequate housing to include units that either have a severe condition problem or 3 or 4 or more of our 4 facilities deficiency problems. The first column gives our estimates of the number of households in Indian country as of the date of our survey in 4 groups. First, there are 53,000 households that are overcrowded, but they're not in a severely inadequate unit. So you don't have to replace all of these units. You just have to build enough more of them to let the current residents spread out enough to eliminate overcrowding for them. We estimate that an additional 27,000 units would be needed for that purpose. The second group includes those that are both overcrowded and in severely inadequate housing. Here you have to replace all of the units and then add more to allow residents to spread out and avoid overcrowding. So our estimate here is for another 17,000 units. And next we have those that are in severely inadequate housing but not overcrowded. And in these cases you just have to replace them one for one, and that turns out to be another 24,000 units. So this adds for a total estimate of 68,000 units. So that's 68,000 units that would be needed by these calculations and assumptions to eliminate overcrowding and severely inadequate housing in tribal areas. You could alter these assumptions and get different results easily. Might be able to solve more of the problem with more substantial rehabilitation, but this gives you a sense of the overall order of magnitude. In this chart, we shift to census data so we can make geographic comparisons. Remember, the only physical problems covered by these data are plumbing, kitchen deficiencies, and overcrowding. The slide shows ACS data for 2006 to 10 ACS, and the dark blue are the bottom are those that have any of the physical problems I just mentioned. The physical problems are, interestingly, are by far the most serious in 3 of these regions: the Plains, Arizona, New Mexico, and Alaska. The Alaska number reaches a high of 36% with these particular physical problems, and that's 3 times the overall tribal area average across the country. So there's a huge variation in the problems we talked about by region. These 3 regions that I mentioned, they accounted for just for 44% of all the AIAN households in tribal areas, but they accounted for 73% of those households who had physical housing problems. The share with cost burden problems is actually higher in other regions. You can see in the bar, like Arizona and New Mexico has a comparatively low share with cost burden problems, and North Central, it's comparatively quite high. In fact, we found that across tribal areas, the incidence of cost burden problems was almost inversely related to the incidence with overcrowding and other physical problems. In other words, places with the most serious overcrowding problems generally had the lowest cost burden problems, and vice versa. This slide maps the extent of overcrowding for individual tribal areas. The quarter of tribal areas with the highest level of overcrowding in this slide are the blue triangles, all above 18%. They were in the poorest regions that I've just mentioned: Plains, Arizona, New Mexico, and Alaska. In contrast, the quarter with the lowest, all below 4.5%, were generally in places that came out among the highest in the private sector employment slide or economic well-being slide I showed you before. Uh, there are more detailed housing finding conditions in our study and our report we don't have time to talk about today. But one was so important we thought we had to mention it, and that's homelessness. Uh, our research generally confirms what has become the conventional wisdom about this topic, namely that the homeless in Indian country mostly translate into overcrowding rather than people sleeping on the street. Why is that true? Because families in tribal areas that do have housing tend to take in family members and others who don't have a place to stay. Our tribal TDHE survey and our on-site interviews generally support this conclusion, and the household survey does as well. According to the household survey, 19% of households said they had more household members than could live in their unit comfortably. This is just modestly above the 16% that our earlier quantification using the HUD standard said were overcrowded. 17%, 17 out of the 19, said that they did have some household members that were there only because they had no place else to stay. In other words, these are people that that were there only because the household head took them in. And it's interesting that very few of the heads of households, of those households, only around 1/5 said that they would ask these people to leave, even though that they were not close members of their family. But they said they thought the vast majority of the household of these people themselves would prefer to get a place of their own if they could. Now, I think the 17% it represents the first time anybody's come close to identifying this form or quantifying this form of homelessness in tribal areas. The survey didn't ask explicitly which people in these households were in this situation, but it does show there were a total of 42,100 of such people in Indian country that were not related at all to the head of household, and another 42,600 that were more distant relatives, like aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, or yet more distant. Those two add up to 84,700 people, 42,100 to 84,700, therefore sort of mark rough bounds on the total doubled up population in Indian country as of the date of our survey. So it's very rough, but I think this is just stuff we didn't understand even the rough orders of magnitude before. The survey also reconfirmed another part of the conventional wisdom, namely that there's a strong preference for homeownership in Indian country. According to our survey, the homeownership rate is 68%, and 90% of the renters, 90%, said they'd like to be owners. 9% of the renters had applied for a mortgage but had been denied, mostly because of a low credit score or insufficient funds for a down payment. Those who never applied for a mortgage noted several reasons. The lack of regular income and the lack of access to a lender were prominent among them. 29% said they did not know how to buy a home or were unfamiliar with the mortgage application process. So that, in a quick summary, is our findings on housing conditions. And let me turn it back to Nancy, who will discuss our findings on Nahasta.
Well, thanks, Tom. I'm glad now that you know what the current conditions are. We did a summary of that. So So looking back, since this is the first study that's been done since implementation of NAHASDA, so what does this mean, and what's happened over time under the new form of providing housing assistance to Indian country? The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996 what followed a long period of federal assistance to tribes, which were called the 1937 Act programs, which consisted mostly of low rent and mutual help programs. And still under that funding mechanism, from the 1960s to the early 1990s, there was substantial new housing production that occurred with that assistance. And it was done basically through very strong oversight and influence by HUD and conducted through Indian housing authorities. The big change with NAHASDA was the focus on tribal self-determination. The funds now go directly to tribes that design and operate their programs. The funding is through the Indian Housing Block Grant, IHBG, which is allocated by formula to the tribes. And just to say a little bit more about that, different ways that tribal self-determination was implemented and that was emphasizing strengthening tribal influence was through negotiated rulemaking with HUD and the requirement that tribes prepare Indian housing plans and annual performance reports. HUD's Office of Native American Programs provides technical assistance and training and other supports to the tribal housing agencies and has a strong performance monitoring system. So kind of the roles have changed, where now it's the tribes that take the lead in determining priorities and all. And there's less federal control, but there's still continued federal support and monitoring. So in terms of first thing to look at in terms of what's happened since implementation of NAHASDA is the funding. So there has been consistent funding of the IHBG block grant in nominal dollars. But what you see here is the blue line is the nominal dollars, and it's been in the range of $600 to $650 million per year. And then the black line, which is decreased, shows the impact of inflation on that funding. So in 17 years, inflation has seriously eroded the level of funding. That 2014 amount of $637 million represents only $450 million in 1998 purchasing power. So the amount has declined kind of to an average of about $429 million per year during that 2011 to 2014 period, a decline of almost 1/3. So they're really, everybody is trying to make do with less, basically. And then what's happened with that decline in funding is that the funding that's used for housing production has been particularly hard hit. And that's because there are certain operating costs that must continue regardless. And then if there's less in the entire pot, then it's the housing production that really has to be cut back. So this chart shows the IHBG expenditures in three groups in 1998 dollars. So the lighter color on the top is housing development costs. The middle blue is FCAS, which is the funding that was needed to maintain and operate the older 1937 Act units built before NAHASDA. And then the darker blue is other services that the block grant can be used for besides just housing production and housing maintenance. So you can see what's happened over time is that light bar, that housing development one, has really decreased because of the fixed cost of maintaining the FCAS units. And over the period of 2011 to 2014, the tribes were able to spend only $128 million per year for housing development, which is just about half of the money that they had been able to spend during that first period, 2023 to 26. So that's just an illustration of how it's affected how the money is spent. At the same time, one has to ask, well, what's happened with the assisted housing stock that was there, the pre-Nahasda housing stock? It has declined, but it was a significant decline, down to 49,000 units in 2014. But this is to be expected. Almost all of it is accounted for conveyance of the mutual help units to their residents, as was called for in the program design. So it wasn't due to demolitions of housing. So despite all of this, even with the losses, there's been substantial levels of production under the IHBG grant. The program supported tribes in building an average of 1,900 new housing units annually in its early years, till 2006. And then the total construction went up to 2,400 units per year in that next period, 2007 to 2010. But then it dropped to an average of 2,000 from 2011 to 2014 because of those funding declines related to inflation. What's even more impressive is the output for rehabilitation. The completed rehabs averaged 2,700 annually. That's the lighter blue up there. In the first period, and then 4,100 in the second period, and 4,800 in the third. But there's sort of a flip side to this, because at the site visits we were told that what was happening, that because there's such a great demand for housing, and much of the rental housing by now is so old, the tribes continue to spend more on rehab in order to maintain whatever stock they do have, because they've got this just large demand for housing. And then the next thing we did was we looked at issues of organizational structure and capacity of the entities that were administering the funds under Nahasda. And that included our survey of the tribes and the TDHEs and site visit interviews, as well as ONAP performance reports. One important point is the large increase in the number of IHBG grantees. Before Nahasda was enacted, funding was distributed through a competitive process, and there are 187 Indian housing authorities for the tribal areas. But in 2014, ONAP received 363 compliant Indian housing plans for 553 tribal areas. So it reflects the broader distribution of funds across Indian country through the block grant approach and the increased capacity of the tribes to administer these funds. The tribes and the TDHEs seem to be complying with Nahasda requirements. They've been able to disperse the funds quickly, including the funds from the American Recovery and Relief Act. Nahasda was also intended to improve leveraging, to enable tribes to leverage these funds in ways that they chose to encourage more private investing for housing and housing development. The survey respondents, they did say that they felt Nahasda really did improve flexibility, and it's easier to leverage funds now, but still the proportion that we're able to leverage funds so far is quite small, but it does appear to be growing, and that, again, just like a lot of things we've discussed already, varies very much across the country. There's a lot of diversity in their both ability to leverage funds and the funds that they have that they can use for leveraging. We also asked about generally reactions to Nahasda, and they did not call for any major overhaul to Nahasda, but they did, of course, have some suggestions for changes that they would like. Such as changes in general program administration and rules related to developing new units. Then, in addition, they'd like to be able to offer assistance to families just above the eligibility line for Nahasda funding, because there are still many others who can't afford decent housing in tribal areas whose incomes might be just slightly above that cutoff. And in both the survey and the site visits, we heard a lot about the need for training and their priorities for better information and computer systems, and training on case management, and training on building maintenance and construction trades. They still see tremendous unmet need and major challenges. Almost all say that there's significant unmet need. 94% report high unmet need for housing assistance, and 87% said that need had grown over the past 3 years. 99% of the TDHEs and that we surveyed have a waiting list for assisted housing. So there are still some critical challenges that need to be faced. They all say that the inadequate funding is the primary barrier to holding them back, which when you see what's happened with inflation, you get a sense of why they responded that way. They also face some major barriers to development, including rapidly increasing development costs, infrastructure development, including things like water and sewer and flood control, and the availability of trained labor. During some of the site visits, we heard about the challenges they have regarding maintaining a trained labor force. When there's not enough construction work on a consistent basis in the tribal areas, then those who have skills leave to find construction work elsewhere. And then when the tribe finally gets a project going, they don't have the workers they need because they're out working somewhere else. So this is a constant challenge that they face. And then we also learned how land acquisition, land assembly challenges were barriers to new housing development due to fractionated land and determining title ownership through the many heirs when the land hasn't been divided. So that's another challenge that they have in development. And then we also, as part of the survey, asked the TDHEs about the kind of challenges that they identified in maintaining and operating their rental programs. And they noted that the biggest challenges were tenants damaging the unit, controlling criminal activity, and tenants not paying their rent on time. They further noted that a lot of the damage issues that came up were related to the overcrowding in the units. So just moving on briefly to some conclusions and implications that we wanted to point out in this presentation. We really came away feeling that the work that needs to be done is to do more to alleviate the underlying causes of these problems. So it's not only a question of, well, just build more houses. There's got to be addressing some of those socioeconomic conditions that Tom spoke about earlier, addressing some of those underlying problems. And we see that as a need for HUD to partner with other federal agencies and with tribes and with local agencies and local governments and private partners as well to really address some of the other problems that were mentioned, such as the complex regulations, the lack of infrastructure, and difficulties in leasing land and accessing capital. And these would assist both housing and economic development. The Harvard Project on Economic Development has mentioned this and has a lot of good studies that back that up. We could also see the need to really target some of that assistance to the tribes that need it most and the different things that different tribes need. Again, speaking to the diversity that we saw both in our data analysis and in our field visits. Our second recommendation results to our experiences doing this study. As we said, it's the first since 1996. Part of that is because it takes so much to launch a study of this complexity and magnitude. Yet we feel that a lot of just regular monitoring and understanding how conditions are changing and what needs to be done could be handled without such a big national study, could be handled with regular 5-year updates using ACS and ONAP administrative data. At least come out with some basic standard reports, so there's some updates every 5 years, and at the same time really working with tribes to increase their capacity to do their own housing assessments and assessments of housing needs and conditions, providing that technical assistance and perhaps resources to do that. Because we did see, when you look back since NAHASTA started, a tremendous increase in tribal capacity. They need this data to run their programs better, and it can't all be done, at a national level. That's sort of where the focus of our of our recommendations go. And then I think we're ready to go on to just a few more. That's where I talked about now the regular monitoring and the capacity building. And from there, we're going to move on to one of the sub-studies that we did, which is on mortgage lending in tribal lands. This is a smaller study, which I totally, I'm trying to find my page here, which I may or may not have with me. I'm going to quick grab my pages right there. They've gotten out of order. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. Sorry about the interruption. So we did a separate study on tribal land, and as Tom mentioned earlier, there is certainly a preference for home ownership in tribal areas. I'm still looking for this, and we did hang on. I'm sorry about this. Here we go. So the lender report. We did a separate study on mortgage lending in Indian country. Now, it mostly was based on the premise, which we certainly found documented in our research, that American Indians and Alaska Natives are similar in terms of the barriers they face to other racial and ethnic minorities and low and moderate income households that have all historically been underserved regarding securing mortgages. But in addition, they face some unique challenges regarding to the fact that much of the land is still held in trust, which creates problems for collateral for a loan. There's a lot of fractionated land ownership and limited access to financial institutions in many remote areas. Now, when looking back to what the case was in 1996, what's really changed is that the Section 184 program was implemented. It was fully implemented by 1998, and that was designed to overcome the barrier of the lending on trust land by providing a 100% guarantee to lenders. So that's the one thing that we looked at in this study. We did a descriptive analysis of the Section 184 data to see how that has changed lending on tribal lands. And in addition, there was some new data collection of in-depth telephone interviews with lenders, native CDFIs, and other organizations. There were 14 interviews that were completed. And the scope of that was quite limited, meant, as you will see if you read our full report, to complement what's in our full report and what we learned in the survey from residents about home ownership. So the two together form, I think, a fuller picture of lending on tribal areas. But that lender survey added some new information and unique perspectives. So here I'm just highlighting the lender recommended strategies. They suggested home buyer education and pre-purchase counseling for residents, and then that the lenders themselves, those that were successful, suggested that working with tribes and TDHEs and other tribal-linked CDFIs and credit unions was certainly a helpful way to improve access. They also felt that there need to be more efforts to provide affordable and flexible lending products and to use flexible and culturally sensitive underwriting for unique circumstances that some of the tribal members faced. And they felt that the lenders, if senior management of a bank or a CDFI was committed to lending in Indian country, it made a great difference in terms of the success of lending, as well as a lender presence near Indian country. So those were things that the lenders felt they could do and work with tribes more, but they also mentioned that they still faced a lot of issues with processing tribal trust and allotted lands, a lot of processing hurdles, sometimes at the federal level, sometimes based on tribal regulations and rules. So those were the main points of that study. I think that there still are a lot of just small things that can hold things up tremendously. Environmental impact statements, getting titles. There are things that continue to be problems that way, but that the environment has certainly improved in terms of getting that moving. And you can see there's the tribal trust land has changed the view of lending on trust land, but still most of Section 184 loans are done on fee simple land. So it still hasn't addressed the entire problem. And there are challenges that linger related to the social constraints and the economic constraints and expanding credit to underserved populations, which is why some of those suggestions about home buyer education were made. So they felt that Section 184 has helped, but there's during the lending crisis, during the recent financial crisis, but really that there are still many more things to do to make the process smoother for lenders overall. So from here, I'm going to turn this back turn it to Diane Levi, who was the lead on the urban study. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon. So my name is Diane Levi, and I'm with the Urban Institute. And as Nancy said, I led the component of the overall study that focused on the housing needs of American Indians and Alaska Natives living in urban areas. So for shorthand, during the course of the study, and shorthand today, just refer to it as the urban study. Give you the title slide there. So I'll start with a very quick overview. So this study focused on a number of questions, including questions that had to do with the change in the American Indian and Alaska Native population living in metro areas, factors that affect mobility between metro areas and reservations and other tribal lands, housing challenges in more urban areas faced by AIAN people, issue of homelessness, and then also looking at the landscape of housing service providers, so services that are available to people in metro areas. And then we also tried to explore the impact of the national recession on housing opportunities and housing needs. So we drew a purposive sample of 30 sites. We ended up with a final sample of 24 metro areas. And we conducted telephone interviews with people, with staff from either an Indian community center or another type of an organization that focused their services on this population in 19 of those 24 metro areas. And then we visited 5 communities. And they're listed here: Anchorage, Billings, Boston, Phoenix, and Reno. So we got some geographic diversity as well as just metro area size diversity. And during those site visits, we conducted individual and group interviews with housing professionals, with service providers, and with members of the AIAN communities. In addition, we looked at secondary data from the ACS, Decennial Census, and from HMDA. And I just want to say briefly that I think you can ascertain that with a small sample size, that the findings here, that they're not generalizable to American Indian and Alaska Native people living in other metro areas. But I also want to point out that what we did find in terms of housing conditions and housing challenges align with the findings from the 1996 study. So some of our key findings: metropolitan areas are home to a majority of the AIAN alone population in the United States, and keeping in mind that some metro areas also include reservations and other tribal lands, but we did see this finding. We're finding that over time that the population in metro areas is growing and that it's becoming a bit more geographically dispersed than what we found in the 1996 study. When we talked to people, there was the perception that a fair amount of that growth is driven by an increasing number of youth and young families that are moving to cities from reservations or villages. Again, that was the perception of those with whom we spoke. We found through this work that American Indians and Alaska Natives living in the sampled metro areas were disproportionately disadvantaged compared with the total population in those sites. So they have lower income, lower rates of employment, and lower rates of educational attainment, higher rates of poverty, and higher rates of extreme poverty. There's a higher median rate of housing cost burden, and people were more likely to live in housing that lacked complete kitchen or plumbing facilities. We also found a lower rate of home ownership and access to home purchase financing, so this aligns with the overall study. And we also found that in the metropolitan areas of our sample that were hit pretty hard by the recession, that there was increased rental demand and rent costs, while there was a slowing of construction of new housing. And so, again, when we talked to people about their perception of the impact of the recession, what we heard is that they thought that the recession led to, because of this increase in demand for rental properties without increased new units, that there was an increase in homelessness and job losses that followed on losing housing stability as a result. We heard from pretty much across the board from people we talked to that homelessness is identified as a growing problem in many of the study sites. We have insufficient data on this, so we don't have numbers of this in the report, but in terms of AIA and homelessness in particular. But the service providers with whom we spoke reported an increase among families, youth, and elderly, and perceive that American Indians and Alaska Natives are overrepresented in the homeless population in some of these metro areas. We also heard a lot both from American Indian and Alaska Native people who are living in communities as well as staff from service providers, that there are a number of challenges beyond those specific to housing, a number of challenges that people face when they move to a metro area. So these challenges include needing to navigate just cultural differences if they're moving off reservation, off tribal lands, particularly into larger urban areas. And also having to adapt to housing as well as workforce systems and processes that are different from those that they know how to negotiate and to navigate in their home community. We found a limited number of organizations, again in the study sites, that target housing assistance to American Indians and Alaska Natives, or that organizations that either target or that serve them exclusively. Most of the housing service providers in the study sites were mainstream organizations, and we also heard from both providers as well as AIA and people with whom we spoke that there was a reluctance among some people to seek services, to seek assistance from non-AIAN organizations. We explored the issue about why why people move to and from metropolitan areas, and the factors that we heard about most frequently from people include housing availability, and again, these can cut both ways. Sometimes these are factors that affect people choosing to return to a reservation or a Native Alaskan village, for example, having to do with housing availability, their personal health status or the health status of a family member and the need to access health care services, educational and employment opportunities, and then also family ties. Again, these are factors that could lead to moves either to or from metro areas. And I think it was the factors, in particular, the factors that people discussed as motivating their moves that really point to the complementary relationship between people and the issues, both on and off tribal lands and native villages, that conditions and the perceptions of opportunity in metro and tribal areas affect people's decisions about where to live. And so I think to get as full a picture as possible about the realities of life on reservation in Alaska Native villages and other tribal lands, it's why it's so important also to look then at conditions in urban areas and motivations for people to live there. And now, Kristen, turn it to you.
Thank you, Diane. Again, I'm Kristen Corey with Econometrica, and I led the, can you hear me? Oh, okay. And I led the census data analysis and the qualitative data collection and analysis for the Hawaii study. And again, to acknowledge the folks from NORC for their excellent work on our household survey on this portion of the study. Just to give you a little bit of background, there's a unique context that we're dealing with in Hawaii in comparison with the tribal lands. The first aspect of this is the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which established the Hawaiian Homeland Trust, which was land set aside for Native Hawaiians who are 50% or more Native Hawaiian by blood quantum. This is a genealogical determination, the blood quantum, and it goes back to the folks who were present in Hawaii at the time of Captain James Cook's arrival in 1778. So the trust lands are set aside for those Native Hawaiians who are related to those ancestors. In addition, the beneficiaries of the HHCA can be 25% blood quantum if they are the children of a leaseholder who succeed or take over that lease. The next issue to describe briefly is the Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant, which is authorized under an amendment to NAHASDA, which supports housing for income-eligible HHCA beneficiaries. Both the block grant and trust lands are administered by the state of Hawaii's Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And per the HHCA, DHHL is responsible for managing the distribution of long-term leases, or homestead leases as they're called, to Native Hawaiians who meet the blood quantum requirements. Among other things, DHHL uses block grant funds to subsidize infrastructure development for income-eligible beneficiaries. So a substantial amount of the assistance a beneficiary would get is putting in water lines, electric, getting the land set up for the build of a home. Demand for homestead leases has consistently outstripped supply. DHHL currently has, or at the time that the report was written, about 43,000 applications on its waiting list, of which around 22,000 were for residential homesteads. The other types of homesteads are agricultural and pastoral, just as a FYI. In part, the demand and supply issue is because many of the lands in the trust are remote and lack infrastructure already, and there's some difficult terrain in a lot of places in Hawaii that's hard to build on. It's also worth noting that people can be on more than one wait list, residential, agricultural, pastoral. They can be on all three. And some of these people are already lessees. So once you get a lease, you can get back on the list to get in line for another lease with the intention to transfer your existing lease over to a child who is at least 25% Native Hawaiian blood quantum. And just for a little sense of scope, DHHL currently reports 56 occupied communities, around 10,000 active leases, and according to census data, around over 30,000 residents on the homelands. Okay. Our report covered several categories of Native Hawaiians. An early challenge for us was identifying a population for the household survey that we could access. Since there is no formally recognized Native Hawaiian tribe or community or entity, there's no list of members as you might find in a tribal community. Working with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, we identified two potential groups of HHCA beneficiaries that we could look at. One of those were those on the waiting list. Those would be the folks who are 50% or more blood quantum. And the other list was current lessees, and those would be folks who are either 50 or 25% if they had succeeded a lease. Where we landed was that the survey would be done with folks on the waiting list. And we had a astoundingly high response rate to our survey and got over 500 responses from beneficiaries on the wait list. We used this population as a proxy for some of the unmet need among Native Hawaiians and supplemented it with data from other sources, including site visit interviews with key informants about a variety of issues, and those included leaders and residents of homeland communities, as well as service providers and DHHL staff. We also did an analysis of census data to identify the current status and some needs, including the decennial census and American Community Survey. And we also had access to some DHHL administrative data, which consisted mainly of some survey data of their current lessee population. All right, getting into some key findings. Native Hawaiian households tended to be larger households, families with children, and single-parent households than other residents of Hawaii. And here we're talking about census data, anyone who was identified as Native Hawaiian, according to the census. Native Hawaiians in Hawaii continue to be more economically disadvantaged than residents of Hawaii, and this was a finding that was also revealed in the earlier report in 1996. Native Hawaiians tend to have lower incomes, higher rates of assistance receipt, and higher poverty rates than other residents of Hawaii. In particular, the beneficiaries on the wait list were more economically disadvantaged than other Native Hawaiians. Overall, residents of Hawaii households in general and Native Hawaiian households living on the homelands. Specifically, they have these folks on the wait list had the lowest median income of all four groups by a substantial margin, $48,000 versus $60,000 for all other groups. The wait list beneficiaries also receive public cash assistance at more than twice the rate of other groups. About 20% of households on the wait list receive public cash assistance versus about 7% of Native Hawaiians in the state and those living on the homelands, and 3% for residents of Hawaii. Native Hawaiians in Hawaii were also disproportionately hurt by the Great Recession. From 2008 to 2011, Native Hawaiians in Hawaii experienced a larger drop in unemployment rate and larger increases in rates of unemployment, poverty, and means-tested benefit receipt than other residents of Hawaii. Key findings on housing conditions. Native Hawaiian households tend to live in older housing with lower values and higher rates of facility problems. Whereas 21% of Native Hawaiian households lived in units built before 1960, the figure was 19% for residents of Hawaii. Median home values were about $75,000 less than the state median for Native Hawaiian households, and whereas about 1% of Native Hawaiian households lacked complete plumbing facilities, that was more like 0.7% of residents in Hawaii. The Native Hawaiian homeownership rate lags behind that of residents of Hawaii, difference between about 55% and 58%. Native Hawaiian households also experience higher rates of overcrowding. Native Hawaiian households had 15% overcrowding as compared with 8% with other residents of Hawaii. Affordability challenges are more acute in Hawaii than the United States overall, as you may know. Housing prices in Hawaii are among the highest in the nation. The median home value nationwide at the time was $188,000, but the median home value in Hawaii was nearly 3 times that at about $537,000. And it's a similar situation for rentals. You find nationwide $841 a month versus over $1,200 a month for Native Hawaiians, or in Hawaii. Sorry. Both Native Hawaiians and residents of Hawaii surpass the national rate of affordability challenges. So the national rate is 36%, and Native Hawaiian and residents of Hawaii had rates of 40 and 42% respectively. Despite the slightly lower rate among Native Hawaiians, key informants from multiple organizations and also from the community noted the prevalence of affordability problems, and some ways of coping that they identified were extended family living or overcrowding, taking additional jobs, and moving to less expensive areas further from employment. And some of these are pretty serious. Obviously, overcrowding, taking on additional jobs, but in some places in Hawaii, that issue of moving to less expensive areas might mean you're adding a 4 or more hour commute to your day because you've gone to a different side of the island. You've got to deal with public transport or other kinds of transport. So it really is a significant burden for many lower income folks. And then finally, the HSA beneficiaries on the wait list faced even more significant challenges across all dimensions than other groups. Radical differences in overcrowding. Nearly 40% of the beneficiaries on the wait list were overcrowded, compared with only 19% on the sample of homelands and 50% on the state's Native Hawaiian households, and also 8% of all residents of Hawaii households. So that's a pretty striking difference. And it partly reflects the fact that they're on the wait list and they have not yet received housing. About 10% of the beneficiaries on the wait list lacked complete plumbing, compared with 1% for other groups. And nearly 1/2 of the beneficiaries on the wait list experienced cost burden. That was 46% compared with 40% of Native Hawaiian households in Hawaii and 42% of other households in Hawaii. And also compared with a radically lower 21% of households on a sample of the Native Hawaiian households based on census data. Homelands households based on census data. And this lower rate, 21% on the homelands versus, say, 46% on the wait list or 40% among Native Hawaiians, is due in part to the financial benefits you receive becoming a lessee on the homelands. It reduces monthly housing costs because you have a very small annual lease amount of $1 per year, low interest government loans, and in some locales an exemption from real estate property tax. And some findings on housing needs. Homelessness among Native Hawaiians is prevalent and often attributed to a lack of access to affordable housing. It's a very similar situation to what Diane was reporting, what was reported for the main study, that people double up and it leads to overcrowding. Native Hawaiians tend to prefer owning a single-family home. Barriers to assuming a homestead lease include inability to secure a loan, perceptions about qualifying for a loan. Many people believe that they won't qualify, so they don't try. location preferences, and inability to locate. In terms of location preferences, one thing might be helpful to know is that when your name comes up on the wait list, you can reject that offer. And oftentimes when people reject an offer, it's because they don't want to live on that island or in that community. And so they'll wait to see if one comes up that's more interesting or acceptable. DHHL, in their building of housing, has primarily been following a model of building turnkey developments, providing pre-built homes constructed by a developer as part of a larger planned community. It previously offered more options for owner build, but had challenges with lessees not completing the build or homes being built to varying degrees of quality and type. Stakeholders generally thought that the higher cost to the buyer of turnkey developments made it harder for low and moderate income beneficiaries to have a lease. Many turnkey homes have a sales price in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, which is substantially lower than the state median of $537,000. But stakeholders thought that the homes could be built for less, and in some cases, if it was a package home or some other model of home building, less than $200,000. There's also increased demand for other housing models, including rentals and multifamily housing, to meet the needs of people at different stages of life or with different access, different preferences and different financial capabilities. DHHL has a few townhome communities and is testing a rental model, although rentals are inherently problematic because DHHL's mission, one of its missions, is to put Native Hawaiians into long-term leases on the land, which carries a bit of a different implication from rental. And private lenders are often unwilling to lend a homelands buyer because of the trust land status, which is a similar issue to the Native Americans and Alaska Natives. From a legal perspective, HHCA beneficiaries who become residents are not landowners, but rather lessees, however long-term. And then finally, some issues related to the block grant. Block grant funds tend to be used for capital improvement, as I mentioned earlier, putting that infrastructure in so houses can be built on the land in those communities. They also do some mortgage and loan, home repair loan financing, loss mitigation, financial and homeowner literacy training, and then grants to some of the communities for model activities. Survey findings suggest a need for increased home ownership support among beneficiary households on the waiting list. The block grant is limited to serving only income eligible beneficiaries, and so that would be only the 50% who can directly receive a lease and the folks who are 25% or more blood quantum who can succeed a lease. So there's a large population that does not get served at all through the block grant. And other sources of assistance, as you might guess, that serve all residents of Hawaii are tight and have closed waiting lists. The study generally found benefits to homelands housing and the need for continued funding for infrastructure, housing development, and housing assistance. An issue faced recently by DHHL was that it, for a long time, was receiving funds from a settlement that provided supplemental support to do some of these things, and that settlement has expired, it's run out. And so in the current period, there really is a struggle to keep things moving. And again, current eligibility rules restrict the program to only about 30% of the total Native Hawaiian population in Hawaii. Given this and the findings generally about the socioeconomic status and needs and challenges in Hawaii in general, they also suggest an unmet need beyond the folks who are served by DHHL. Okay.
So thank you to all of our presenters. So now we're going to have a time for questions and responses from the researchers. We can also take questions over email if you want to email to housing needs report at hud.gov, housing_needs_report at hud.gov. So I'm thinking that probably, since we don't have microphones on the tables, I guess they put that microphone up there for questioners, and answerers could perhaps come here and use this one. So can I have our first question?
In terms of the Native Hawaiian population who have been offered leases and turned them down, what's the average number of turn downs before they accept a lease?
I don't think we know that. Can you,
You should come to the mic for the recording, basically.
Okay. I don't think we have that number, but what did DHHL tell us, that they can cycle through that list in a few years?
Yeah, I don't know if we have that specific number, but they do go through it.
The sense is there's a lot of rejection
Yeah.
of the lease offers.
And how much of that is due to increased commute times?
You mean as far as rejecting?
Yeah, that do people reject more because they prefer the community that they're in, or they want their kids in the community that they're in, or, they prefer just the view or the amenities, or how much of it is, as you say, choosing the wrong place can add 2 or 3 hours to their commute time every day?
We'd have to look at the survey results. But my sense was that it's a lot about, I want to live in this community, I want to live on this island.
Right, exactly. There might be some historical connection to it, and the actual plot may have some, significance for the family member. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Gwen Salden with the National Congress of American Indians, and you mentioned the estimate of what additional new housing that's needed, and since this is only a sampling survey of only 38 tribes, because you mentioned there's 36,000 new units that are needed, I guess my question is, how are we going to total them out with all the other tribes who were not included in the survey? The reason why I ask this is that the new administration has this infrastructure proposal that's going to be coming. And one of the things that we really don't have in any country's data of what the true need of Indian housing is. So I'm just curious to see if there's an estimate cost or estimate number, since this is only a small sampling, of what would be a general number that would be needed for all the tribes who do receive.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Yeah.
I think Nancy or there's a mic over there too.
Yeah, it is 68,000 for the number of units, but that is an estimate for the whole country. No tribes are left out because it was a nationally representative sample. And as Tom explained, it was based on certain assumptions, so I would say it's probably a relatively conservative estimate because we could only use the evidence that we collected to come up with that estimate.
I'm Adae Jackson. I was here for the 96 study. My question is regarding, I took part in it, by the way. My question is regarding the 68,000 units that are currently needed. How much of that you think can be met by the 184 guarantee program? Have you thought about that at all? I know that the 68 are affordable units, but the 184 program is a market rate. That's the guaranteed loan program. So how many of those, have you thought about that at all?
No, we really didn't address that in this study. I'm sorry.
I just have, we don't know that number precisely, but the 184 volumes are quite small in relation to that. Some people, you can use different assumptions, but the 68,000 number I don't think is outrageously high, but it's interesting to compare it with the fact that IHBG production has been averaging about 2,000 units a year in terms of new construction. There's been a lot more rehab, but new construction is only about 2,000 units per year, so it's still a sizable gap in the volume.
So we have a few questions from email, and Heidi's going to try to read them over that. Oh, it looks like it works. Good. Let's just do one at a time.
Okay. So this is a question from Hawaii. Can you hear me? For Nahasda purposes, all of Alaska is within an Indian area. Early drafts of the report did not include information for parts of Alaska that the authors did not consider to be Indian country. This should be concerning to all tribes because if it is true, then AIAN housing needs in Indian areas, as defined by Nahasda, may be substantially understated. We understand the primary purpose of this study is to make sure that AIAN housing needs in all Indian areas are fully reported to Congress. This inclusion of all Nahasda-defined Indian areas, including Alaska, should be implicit in the executive summary and not implied through appendices or other less than obvious references. We want to be sure HUD/PD&R has indeed addressed AIAN needs in all of Indian country as defined by Nahasda. Will the final report reflect all of Alaska's Indian country as provided in Nahasda?
Well, I would say I guess I'm a little confused by the question because our sample of our study is a legitimate random sample of Indian country as a whole, including Alaska. So I think as the questioner might remember in my remarks, we talked a lot. We have a lot of information about Alaska. And I think, again, our sample size was only sufficient to allow us to make estimates for the nation as a whole. But Alaska is definitely a part of that, just like any other part of the nation is involved in that.
The only thing we use the census areas as defined for the study, so that includes all of Alaska, and it doesn't go by what the definition was under Nahasda specifically. So a lot of the information that's census-based is completely, and the sampling that was census-based is definitely represents the whole state.
Can we have another question from the room?
Hi, this is Todd Richardson. I'm the acting DAS for policy development in PD&R here. And my question is about technical assistance. So we have this study. We've gone and talked to a lot of the TDHEs. If you were to sort of think about what were the top one or two things that you think that we should be focusing our technical assistance resources on, what would those top one or two things be?
You go first.
It is, we didn't explore this as much as we'd really like to. There is more research that could well be done to pinpoint this, but we started looking at what people said they would like technical assistance on, and a lot of that was on, information systems, on housing maintenance, on case management, to deal with folks living in tribal areas. But as we thought about this, and toward the end of the study, something that came up from our side that was not necessarily quite focused on in the remarks from the tribe was the need for more technical assistance on leveraging and economic development. I mean, our main finding was that there is a money constraint. Under Nahasda, these folks seem to have been able to spend the money when they've got the money. Money is a constraint. Where's that money going to come from? You're not sure, but certainly at the end of it all, we put a lot more emphasis on trying to help the tribes learn how to spur economic development. The Harvard group found some tremendous innovations under self-determination in tribes across the country. And the whole idea, at least we've thought of getting the news out on how that was accomplished to a lot more of the tribes that have more need for it would be a very high priority.
Can we take another question? Oh, did you want to respond as well, Nancy?
I just wanted to second that, but I think, again, to point out the diversity, I think that there's a room in that technical assistance for different tribes to help each other. There are really some tribes who've gotten much further along in that process that could really help other tribes in sharing that information.
Heidi, can we have another question from the email?
This is a question from a HUD staff person. During the presentation on Hawaiian homelands, it was stated that Native Hawaiians prefer to live in single-family homes. What was that statement based off of? Was a survey taken?
That in particular was based on census data.
I think this is a quick one. Also from Hawaii, when will the Native Hawaiian Housing Study report be available?
So it will be available towards the end of February, or maybe at the very end of February. Maybe on the last day of February. But it's almost ready.
And then another question, does HUD or NAHASDA consider modular house units for low-income AIANs?
Andrea, did you want to comment? No? Anyone? Can you repeat the question, Heidi?
Does HUD or NAHASDA consider modular house units for low-income AIANs?
So this is Todd Richardson. So this question is, I think, less of one about the study itself, but a lot of tribes do, in fact, use modular housing in as part of their affordable housing inventory under NAHASDA. So it's certainly an allowable use if that's the question. I have another question. Do you have questions on the? You're done. Okay. Actually, the technical assistance question, I actually wanted to direct that on the Hawaiian homeland side of the house, too. It's a very different environment. What are do you see technical assistance needs on Hawaiian homelands that we should be thinking about? And I will give
Technical assistance that HUD can provide?
Yeah. For our providers.
Right. Most of the feedback we got was about what Native Hawaiians need. Can you think of anything, Chuck?
We use it in home buyer counseling. I mean, they're doing that. I'm sorry? Credit counseling, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There
But-
is that going on.
Right. But in terms of technical assistance DHHL needs?
Sure. Yeah.
That's a good question. It's easily found out. We can get that information for you.
That's fine. I'm sorry. It's an area where we have some flexibility in our resources, and we make decisions about that every year. So that might be helpful to get some thoughts there.
All right. I mean, I think the issue of leveraging funds might also be relevant there because they've got some challenges. This last round, they didn't get any block grant funds. They've lost settlement, or not lost, it expired. And this was
And the settlement was from the state.
from the
That
state,
was
sorry.
20 or 30 million each year they got for about 20 that was a big chunk of money that all of a sudden
They're supported a lot.
went. Yeah.
And they're eternally challenged by this 50% rule. So whereas other state agencies can serve any Native Hawaiian who identifies themselves as Native Hawaiian, DHHL is really restricted to that genealogical test, which makes leveraging funds at times probably a little harder.
So, did you have a question, Carol? No?
So one of the recommendations you made was to pick up on, excuse me, the administrative data, the census data, and to track changes in housing needs. That would be something HUD can do, and that this report would serve as a platform for that. That it's very costly to do this kind of study, and this was a huge effort that was well worth all the resources spent. I think it's an awesome report. But can you talk to that point about what next, what HUD can do using this report as a platform? Would that be receptive to the tribes to take the administrative data, the census data, and to try to develop some sort of regular reporting that feeds on this report or off this?
Sure, to some extent, it's a little speculative because we haven't asked them about it yet. But we also noted this was an expensive study, but more problematic than the impact of that was it took 20 years. The tribes were asking for more research on how are we doing, are things getting better or getting worse, for 20 years before you had any answers. And so I think that this potential of using the combination of Census ACS plus administrative data really offers a lot of potential, but I think HUD also would really have to do a job to sell the tribes on this idea and to get the concept going. I know there's a lot of mistrust when you talk about the ACS, but the fact of the matter is the small sample sizes associated with the American Community Survey do make it very difficult to provide credible estimates for individual tribal areas, but the sizes are plenty large enough, I think, to do estimates of a lot of the key variables by region. And so what we were able to do is just say what it was with our survey, nationwide. But with the ACS data, the ACS sample size better than it was, and is improving in quality. Regional estimates of the changes in the level of overcrowding facilities and cost burden seem to me they could be strong, viable estimates. And you could do those now every 2 or 3 years. The complications in doing that, though, which I haven't really thought through, but Todd and staff would have to think about more, is how do you take into account changes in tribal area boundaries in relation to census geographies. And that's tough, but I think I guess I would suggest starting now. It would really be a great thing to start getting the perceptions up that at the time of the next census or whenever you want to do it, we're going to come up with a revised estimate and assessment, and get in the habit of thinking about this in more dynamic terms and more, with more frequent updating, so that people can be thinking, how are things changing in different regions and in what ways. So I guess as we thought about it, as far as we got, I think we were pretty optimistic that this is a better way to do things and it would be doable and credible to Congress. So that's where we left off.
Ende?
Ex-
And you need to speak into the mic.
yes, they're having a hard time hearing on the line.
I have one final question, and it's regarding the 59,000, I believe it is, remaining 37 Act units, 57,000, 54,000. And I'm wondering how that compares with the 1996 study, first of all. And secondly, my thought from that is, since those are the original units under the program, we would want to, I would find it interesting to learn more about what happens with those units going forward. So something to think about. 59,000 units.
Yeah.
Yeah, 54,000 you said remaining, and how that compares with what was in stock in 1996. It's far more than that, of course. You conveyed some to the residents, and that's the original housing. And so what's happening with that housing going forward?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's only part of that I think we can answer. I mean, from the ONAP data, from the performance reports, we're able to say how many FCAS units are still within the housing authority's purview. But if it has been, once it has been given over to an owner, I don't know that there's any way anybody knows what's happened to it. Did they rehab it themselves? Did they sell it? Did they tear it down? I don't know how there's a way to track that.
In 1996, there were 87,000 public housing units.
David, did you just say that in what year was that?
1996.
In 19.
During the passage of NAHASDA, there were, I believe the number is approximately 87,000 were under.
So it was 87,000 units in 1996?
It was called the Public and Indian Housing Program at the time. So it's dropped, but they're still holding out.
Yeah.
So we have, do we have more questions from the floor? Anything on email, Heidi? Are you sure there's no questions from the floor? One more.
Hey, all right. Okay. George Carter in Housing and Demographic Analysis. For the urban part of the study, I was wondering whether you had, was there a survey component to it? And did it analyze migration to urban areas or reasons?
There was not a there was not a survey component to that study, and so we selected the sites. It was a purpose-based sampling of the sites, and then within the sites, in order to get to people to talk to, we first worked from developing lists of Indian community centers or other organizations that target or exclusively serve the American Indian, Alaska Native communities. So we talked to staff from those organizations and then worked with those in the 5 sites where we visited. We worked with a key organization to help us recruit people for discussion groups. So it was pretty much purposive and selective all the way through. And I mean, part of it is hard. A survey would be a great thing to do, and certainly we would learn a lot more. I think just finding out what is a sampling frame, what is a population from which one would draw a sample for a survey would be a huge challenge, to put it mildly. So it would be great to do, but we were not able to do that.
Just one addition to that on the migration side, I really think it would be great to be able to do more on that front, because the numbers we suggest, the population numbers that I look with follow on to the earlier work that Catherine Pettit did, suggest that most of the migration out from tribal areas goes to the surrounding counties, not to faraway cities. It goes to the surrounding counties. And those, it's mostly or heavily populations that are AIAN alone, in other words, that they are predominantly single race, but there is a lot of multi-race in addition. If you look at the metropolitan areas, the huge increments of growth in those areas come from populations that identify that as Hispanic, and large shares of the migrant population into this country are legitimately American Indians, but they're from Central or South America, people who migrated here, but they're legitimately Americans. And additionally, there are many, many people who are not likely to be migrants from tribal areas, but maybe even the bigger component of growth is people who are multi-race, but they identify AIAN as one of their races, but not necessarily the predominant race. So what there is around those numbers in urban areas is a lot more mystery than there was 20 years ago. And there have been some studies that have not yet been conclusive about that. But I think that that those components of growth really need to be analyzed. But the migration from the tribal areas to cities doesn't account for a whole lot of it, I don't think.
So with that, I guess we'll wrap up. I want to thank the presenters and thank everyone who came and listened, who sent in questions and all of that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.